We do, of course, still have the air dry clay. And it does, I actually think so far for all the projects, the flowers, it works the best. This is one I did with air dry clay and it's super solid. So you just want to make sure nothing's too thin, like just like regular pottery. And you want to make sure you slip and score really well and have everything adhered again, just like regular pottery. Worst case scenario, of course, air dry clay, if something breaks off, you just glue it on. But it does work very, very well for the flowers. This is the whole point of this particular Zoom thing is I want to show you some other styles because unless you have done that, a lot of people were needing a little more guidance on those. And if you've already done like the basic flower like these, this is an air dry one, so it's a little bigger than what we did in with the kiln-fired because the cookie cutters are bigger. But basically, you know, once you've kind of done these, and these look fabulous, even if you just stuck with this style, of course it looks fabulous with different colors or whatever. But if you want to do some different styles, the point of this is so that you can come in or with air dry, it doesn't matter. And then you can have some guidance for trying some different things. So that was very long, but you understand. All right, so I know we've got everybody at different levels and some of you have done the class, but it's been a while. Now I'm not going to go through the original class. I think you all kind of get the, even if you don't remember totally, you understand and remember enough that it'll be fine. This was just the ones that we did. And it's using, of course, the round cookie cutters. And all I did, and I know you guys, most of you know this, all I did is pinch the petal and that gave it a little bit of a shape. But this is the basic flower, right? With the class that I taught. Now, you could take, just like we've said in the original class, you could take that basic class and make a lot of variations, right? So this is one I did at that outdoor private party we did. It's the same thing, right? Same thing as this, only I started curling the petals a little bit more. So the cool thing about clay, I love it. I think it's so great because you really can do so many things and you can give your flower so much movement. It's really, you can do a whole lot. So anyhow, same basic thing, but instead of being like I don't have one of the air dry ones here, but instead of it being so round and rose this looks like a rose too, but instead of it being like a rounded petal, you can really give it a lot of character and movement just by taking that and really just curling those petals, right? And I love the way that looks. And then obviously, like we teach in the class, the other variation is to do the pointed petals. Now, David did this one at the private party, and I think it looks so spectacular. He just did the pointed petals, but he did a little bit more to it because when he cut the pointed petals, he pinched the ends. And you can see, I mean, that really does a whole lot for that flower. It looks so, I love it. I just think it gives it so much depth. And again, it's the same class, the same things we've done, but that little teeny bit of a little something, something adds a lot. So you can see just pinching the ends after you cut the point, like on the basic class that we teach, does a lot, right? Okay, so I want to show you some little basic techniques for some other ones. So the first thing I want to show you is one that really commonly gets asked about, and that's this one. Okay, and there's a couple. So this I'll show you the really basic way to do these petals, but there's some little tiny little tweaks that just give it so much more. And so I want to show you that because again, you may not notice from here, but it really does make a difference. David did a really great one that I don't have anymore because someone begged and he finally sold it to him. It was cool, but it was like this. But he didn't do all the little tweaks I'm going to show you, but it still looked cool. So again, any variation of these is just fine. So on that one, when people start, we start in the middle like we always do. And what happens is, and actually it'll be easier, I think, if I just show you, and then we'll talk through this. So let me go ahead and roll out a base, and then I'll start building that on so you can kind of see. And the other thing I want to show you on this, and I know we kind of went through this in the classes, but I guess I've realized a little bit more and more how important it is, or what I'm doing differently that sometimes people struggle with. So you see how I'm flattening this out before I roll it? It turns out I realized that that actually is what makes a really huge difference on the flowers sometimes, when some people were having trouble with the clay sticking to their board. And then also they would, when they would roll it, the end, if it was thin, it would stick to the board. And then when they trying to peel up their petal, the clay would stick, and then you have like a jagged edge. Now that actually can look extremely cool. I have to say I've seen some really cool flowers with that the jagged petal edge. Instead of being all smooth and round, it was all kind of jagged because of that. Even if it was an accident, it was a happy accident. It looked really cool. The reason why I'm realizing that a lot of people have that particular problem is because of the pressure that they're putting on when they roll. So when you roll out your, so basically when I use, and this is air dry clay, but again, it doesn't matter whether it's kiln fired or whatever. I just did some kiln fired flowers not too long ago, so I'm familiar with the difference, which is not a lot. This is, air dry is a little easier to work with the flowers because it really doesn't stick as much. But if you learn this technique, you're not going to have problems with it sticking. So the reason people have problems sometimes with it sticking to the board is usually they're applying too much pressure. And the reason why they're applying a lot of pressure, and again, this totally makes sense, but so is because they're trying to smooth it, and they're trying to roll it out with their roller. Now I realize that I actually don't do that very much. What I actually do is I press it out first, almost to the thickness that I want. And then I just use the roller, instead of pushing really hard, I just use the roller lightly on top to kind of smooth it. So it gets all my finger marks out. And I'm actually, so I'm not like pressing a lot, putting a lot of pressure down where it sticks. I'm generally pushing it out first so I don't have a chunk. Because if you have a chunk, you know, you're gonna be pushing really hard trying to get that flat, right? So I find it a lot easier. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm learning that I think that's what, sometimes when people have issues with that, I think that's what's going on. So I usually just smush it out first, like I said, about the thickness that I want. And then I'll use this to kind of roll it flat. I'm not, again, applying lots and lots of muscle to it. I'm going to go ahead and just cut a base. And then that's the other thing too, is if it doesn't go all the way through, I just press the edge and then take it off. So, all right. So on these guys, a couple things again to notice. They have a serrated I don't know if maybe fluted edge might be a better word. Hopefully you can see that. It's not a straight edge. Now you could do a straight edge, it would look cool. But these don't, and I think it adds a lot to have that. So what you could do is use, I always get the cookie cutters with the straight edge and the, again, I don't know what this is actually called. I apologize if I'm botching it. I don't know if it's a fluted edge. I always in my mind call it a ruffly edge. So I'm just going to call it a ruffly edge because it creates ruffly petals. You know what I mean. Anywho, all right. So I would use that edge to cut the petals for these guys because it does it for you. But if you didn't have that, you could just use your pin tool and actually cut, you know, a scalloped edge. Maybe that's word. I don't know. Scallop. Well, okay. All right. So the other thing on this particular one, these are all actually the same size. So when we do these other flowers, we usually start with smaller cookie cutters and then we work our way up to bigger ones, right? On this particular one, generally I would use the same size cookie cutter. Um, so let me just smush this out a little bit, and I'm going to show you kind of hopefully fairly quickly. All right, again, smushing it out, getting it almost to the thickness that I want. And then I'm gonna, then I'm gonna smooth it. All right. And like I had mentioned in some of my classes, I'll usually pick it up and turn it to, and that'll help it also not stick to the board and stuff. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and just grab the smallest one because that's probably easiest. Because you can actually decide how big you want them to be. This looks like it's probably more like, you know what, maybe not the smallest one. I'm gonna go the next size up. And again, you can play with it to kind of see, it kind of depends on how big you want it to be. So it doesn't really matter, but I'm gonna go not the smallest, but the next size up. And I'm gonna take the ruffly edge and cut some of those. And like I said, I'm not really looking for them to be different sizes or anything. This size should work just fine all the way across as I build my flower here. But what I do for this, and this is where I was saying that I'm gonna show you some things that you might not necessarily notice. Grab my thing here. If you're just kind of looking at the flower. But the other thing I want you to notice about this is that not only does it have this kind of ruffly edge, is that it's thinner up here. It's actually quite thick down in the base, and then the edges where at the top actually are thinner. So I would, if I was going to do this, what I would do is cut something, and that can be thicker than that. It can be, and you can go quite thick, but you could play with it and see. But if I was going to do it, I would do it kind of thick, and then I would take like one side and I would use my fingers and I would start to thin it out. See how I'm doing that? I'm pressing it thinner. And you notice that what this does is a couple of things. It actually makes these little scalloped edges a little bigger, which is I kind of like, as opposed to maybe little ones. And then, like I said, you're going to get a little more dimension. So basically what they've done is they have a thicker bottom here and a thinner top, and then you would roll it into the tube that you see. And you want the thicker part at the bottom and the thinner part at the top. Okay. And for this, what I think would be easiest really is just anytime I want to flatten something, I'll just tap it on my board. And that creates a nice flat bottom there. Okay. And I would basically do I would basically do my whole flower like this. And let me just do 3 to start because I want to show you a couple things. So again, I'm going to take the one side and I'm going to press it out. So it's real thin and skinny on one side and thicker on the other side. I'm going to roll it again. I'm not rolling a tight tube. You see, you can still kind of see through it. I'm not rolling it super tight. It's just to give it that, that effect. And then I'm going to take the bottom and I'm going to tap it on my board. And that creates that flat bottom. Okay. And these are all the same height, basically. And I'm going to do one more and I'm going to start to show just to start. In fact, you can see from this one, they started with 3. So that's what we're going to start with. Okay. Okay. So basically that's what I've got to start. And I can easily slip and score that in the center, just like we do in the regular flower class with that little rosebud. We've kind of got something going on like that here. Now, to start, I would do though something more like the rosebud, where you could technically slip and score it on like this. And this is where I usually see most people don't get the effect that they want if they might get this part. And then what happens is what I've seen is they'll slip and score them on. And looking from the top down, you see how they're all the same height, which is fine for the beginning part. But what happens is if you do that with all of these all the way across, basically you're just going to get tubes sticking up on a right on a platform, and it doesn't, and that's usually where people get a little confused because it doesn't look like this. So what you're going to want to do is just like we do with the rosebud, is go ahead and take those to start. And again, I'm showing you how to do this so you know how to do all the others once you add and add. But what I would do for the center one is just like we do with the rosebud, I would kind of squish it together because you kind of want it to do this. You want it to start to in the middle. And let me show you this one. Okay, so the top is the highest point and then they start to bow out, right? And that's what you're going to want the overall effect to be, is you're going to want these tubes to start going like this on your flower. So otherwise you'll have just a bunch of straight tubes, right? So what I would do to start is start with your 3, kind of squish the bottoms a little bit. Do like we did with the regular flower and cut the base off, and you have a nice flat base. You can tap it, and then you can slip and score that part on. And kind of do like we always do, right? And then you've got your center part. And then you've got it started, and then you're going to do the exact same thing with all the other tubes with the same cookie cutter. You're going to flatten the top, and you're going to keep adding all the way around. But when you add, you're going to kind of squish them in at the base, and that will bow these tubes out like this as you kind of build the flowers so they're not all standing straight next to each other. You want it to kind of go like this, right? But then the other little detail that I really like that they did on this is that thin edge of these little tubes, they kind of bent them out. So they took this really thin little cute fluted edge or ruffly edge or scalloped edge, whatever you want to call it, and they kind of bowed it out like that. Can you see that? And they did that on all of them. So that's what I would do as you go along, is kind of, and you can do it as much or as little as you want, but it really, I think it makes a difference. So look at these little guys compared to this one that doesn't have it done. This still looks cute, but I think that's a really cool little detail that they did, that they just slightly bent these out. That little thin edge, just slightly, just like that. See? Isn't that cool? And then from here on out to build it, again, like I said, you're going to do the same size. And just again, to show you, I'll add a couple more. I don't want to build the whole flower because I want to show you a bunch of other stuff, but you'll get the idea. Because it's just like the other flower. Once you get the basic techniques and you add it and you start going, you go, oh, okay. And then it starts to all come together. Then it's just building it out, right? Oh, the other thing I should probably mention that they do is when they're adding these tubes, they're putting the overlapped side in towards the center. So they're not, let me show you. If you'll notice, none of these outer ones have the overlapping sides facing out. They have the overlap all facing in towards the center. And that'll keep your flower looking clean and nice and not chaotic. So basically, if I start adding tubes and start just putting them next to each other, that is going to look pretty funny, right? Where it's just sticking next to each other. So it's important that when you do this, that you smush them into the center, and that kind of flattens them at the base. So I'm just gonna smush them all in. Smush it in, and then that way also I can get more on there. Okay. And again, what's going to happen is you're going to get that natural bend like this, where the top's the most high point and then the rest kind of are lower, right? And then I'm going to, again, kind of bend out that fluted edge. I seriously got to find out what that's actually called because I don't, it bothers me. All right. So again, basically, so I've added two more, I fluted the edge, and then I smushed in the base. Yes, that's a technical term, smushed in the base. And then I have more room, of course, for more tubes. And again, I'm creating that natural curve where this is the top and then these go out. Okay. Which one next? Actually, there's something I haven't done yet that I really want to try. I'm actually excited. But I want to show you a couple other things real quick that'll be easy because it's kind of just variations of what either you've already done or um, or kind of what I just showed you. So like for example, this flower. Now instead of taking the it's almost okay. So I want to show you in the middle here. What that is technically in pottery, they use what's called an extruder. And it's this little metal thing that you squish clay through and it makes spaghetti looking clay. And I use at home, I'll use a garlic press because that does the same thing. Anything that pushes the clay through little holes and makes a bunch of little squigglies, that's literally all they did there. But if you don't have something like that and you wanted to do, this an effect like that, so you could start with, instead of, again, that little rosebud that we normally do on the basic flower, I would just start with, if I didn't have an extruder, I could just do like a round piece and then tap the bottom so it's flat and then slip and score it. In fact, actually, I'm just going to use the same thing here. Slip and score it on like this. Okay. And basically you could create the same effect with a couple of different ways. What I saw somebody do on one of their flowers, I think I got a picture of it, is they took their paintbrush and they basically, did something like this. They pushed in the paintbrush and that's a really good effect, that you can get and you don't have to be clean about it, and whatever, you could be really more precise or you could get real messy about it because again the idea is that it's like this is just kind of a bunch of so that's fine if you want to get like that because that gives the same effect, right? And because basically again what you're looking for is an effect like that in the middle before you start putting your petals around, and it does change the flower, right? Something very minor like that will change your whole flower as opposed to again the buds that we do in the middle like that. Totally different kind of thing. So you could do something like that very easily. And once you've got that and you can go down probably a little, you just don't want any of the plain ball of clay to show. So again, however you want to do that, that's a good way to do it if you don't have, like I say, a garlic press. Drop my rag here. Or an extruder. And then what you would do is just like we've done on all these other flowers is you would start building around that. So for example, I'll take these little guys that I already kind of rolled out and used for a different flower. I could do, take that rounded edge, and these are a little big, but it'll give you the idea. Normally I would do something a little smaller. Okay, actually this is the thing, is from the class, if you play with it and you'll find different things you probably didn't think of. But so look at this with the way they did the edges. It's really, they did a version of this, but they literally only have like 3 rounded pieces. So you could do that with your pin tool, is just cut so that you've got, I'll show you. you know, something like that, because that's basically what they have. Is they've got like three little rounded pieces. You can kind of see all of them are pretty much the same with that, is they've got three. And then what they did is they created interest by not having it too neat. They did the same thing we did on the yellow flower, is they made it real thin. They made it thicker down at the base and they made it really thin at the top. And they left like the little itsy bitsy things and things that, you know, when we're making stuff, a lot of times we go, oh, it's a mistake or that looks bad. But see, like they actually have a piece that they glazed on here. Hopefully you can see it. That was a piece of clay that just stuck and it looks cool. It actually makes it look more organic and natural. So it's kind of neat because it looks more organic and natural. It doesn't have to be perfect like that. So you could actually cut it, you know, in that way. And again, keep it kind of imperfect because that does make it look kind of cool. Or you could do what we just did with that yellow one and do like the fluted edge. And again, just kind of make it nice and really, really thin. And when you're doing this with kiln-fired clay, and then we go to glaze it, the thin edges basically are usually like a lighter color because they're not a David would know the exact he would tell you all the ins and outs, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to get that technical. But basically, you know, the clays will absorb glaze in different areas and it will change depending on the glaze too. Sometimes it changes colors or whatever. So this one, you notice it's very light, even though they only use one solid color glaze for this particular flower. It has dimension because it's thin on the edges, and so it took the glaze differently. So that's the other thing it does. It gives your glaze dimension. And if you're doing it with air dry clay like I've done, what I do is I'll just paint it, and I show it in that video, is then I would just dab some white or something to highlight the edges just to give it again dimension. But either way, so you want the thin edge, could be either one, something like this. And then what I would do is I'm going to cut that down a little bit, just like we do with the regular flower class. You know how I usually cut off the base and then we'll slip and score around this little nub thing. Now these are again much bigger than normally what I would do, but I have to say, and I will show you a picture of it later if you want to stay on or see the video later. I think Sherry, I'm pretty sure Sherry, it was you, did these really beautiful, and I never know the names of flowers, so I apologize. I think they were poppies. I really don't know, but they were cool, and I will show you. Anyhow, it was very cool. And she actually did a really big, I think it was Sherry, anyhow, a really big petal like these. So you could keep it like that and that would look, I mean, it would look awesome. And then you would build it just like we normally do, where we overlap the petals. Normally what I would do is a smaller petal. This is kind of done the way that we did our regular flowers, where we start with the smallest size and then they kind of work their way up. And around the base, they use the smallest size circle, but they basically did this effect, the thin edge. And again, doesn't matter if you do it with the cookie cutter fluted edge or if you cut it with the pin tool. You get the idea. You'll have a really cool little ruffly edge, but usually you use a smaller size. You would slip and score it on. Actually, let me cut it down again so you can kind of see how it would look. So for example, I might start just like we do our regular flower. I would start with one petal, and again, you cut it down and make it whatever size you want. Just keep the edge thin, and then you would start slipping and scoring and building it just like you do your other one, right? Where you kind of overlap and then you keep adding and you go round and round and you go bigger and bigger. It's the same idea. And you'd slip and score this, and then for the center, when you have a center like this, what I like to do, did they do it? Kind of, as I'll usually kind of bend it in just slightly, because that center part, I just think I like the look of it, but I'll still show the center. And then the other ones, again, as you add petals going out, then you're kind of, the petals might start like this, and then they're going to kind of go like this, right? So again, you get the idea. You've already gotten the basics from that first class, but there's a lot of, again, that's a great variation to do, and see how those petals again, whether that's, this one is the one done with the cookie cutter edge. This one's cut with three, so it doesn't matter. But you get the effect or the idea, thicker in the middle, I mean at the end that goes to the base, and thinner on the edge. And it does make, I think it makes a difference. It's the way it looks overall. But they all look good. So that's just another variation, right? Is that you notice the center is not the little, you know, rosebud. It's just got the two. And again, that may not seem like a big deal, but if you're trying to do this type of flower, you're going to want, this is very, very thick base of those rounds that you're rolling out. It's very thick on the base and it's thin on the top. And what that does is when you do that, you have less petals. And for something like this, or like a succulents that, you know, has a lot of water in its leaves, and it's not like a rose where you've got all these tight petals all over the place, right? It's got thick petals. And if you got to have your clay thick, basically, so that there's less petals. It's kind of like, and I know I showed you guys, I'm positive you all seen at one point, I showed you Nick's flowers where he would do a lot of very thin petals, and they'd be tons of tightly put in little petals, and they were gorgeous. But it's a totally different look, right? This is, again, same idea, but very, very, very thick at the base. So, and then again, just a slight variation for that particular shape. So I'll show you real quick. What I would do for that to start it out is I would do a very thick round, 2 rounds to start, because there's only the 2 petals. So let me do one first. Again, I smush it out to about the thickness I want, and then I'm gonna just kind of smooth it. I'm not pressing really hard. I'm gonna take my smallest, the air dry clay kits, again, have bigger things. So if you needed it smaller, you could cut it down. So what I would do again is I would start with a pretty thick petal. I know that's very thick, right? So I would do 2 of those like that. And then I have, again, very, very thick rounds like that. Again, this is for very thick petals. Just like what we've been doing, it's thick at the base, it's thin at the top. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to leave the base very thick, and then you're going to just flatten this top part. So you can kind of see I've just flattened this end, kept the rest very thick. All right. I still have it round. For this particular petal shape, it still starts with a rounded, basically like a round. We've made it a little oval. Now I could either slice off the base to make it flat, depending on how high I wanted it. Like if this was the right height, I would just tap it on my board and flatten it. And that would give me, but if this is a little tall, and actually, again, I want to do something a little smaller than this smallest round thing. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to slice off the base so that and then I'm going to test the height to about what I want, which is going to be even a little bit, I'm going to do it a little bit lower even than that. But again, I've got a very thick base still. See how that, I've got thick bases and then the tops are thin. And I've got 2 pieces, and once I've kind of got them the height that I want, and again, if this is too big, you could easily just use your pin tool, slice off, you know, the edges, make it whatever, you know. This is the best thing about clay, is that you just try it, and then if you don't like it, you do it again or try something else, you know. Anyhow, so I've got my 2 little pieces. I would slip and score them on the base here to start. And this you can see it's literally just kind of bowing out the petal like we do on these even. You can see I just kind of did that, right? It's the same thing. This is a very simple um, center. That's what I mean. It doesn't have to be really complicated to be cool. So I would literally just put a little divot in the middle like that, and I would slip and score them in the center like that. And again, you make them whatever size you want. That's a very large center. You could, this is small. So you would just decide on that. But that's what you would do is you would literally just do something very small like that, thick at the bottom, thin at the top, put a little divot in the center. So it looks like a little mouth. And then that would be your center for that. And then all the subsequent petals that you start adding, just like we do the regular flower class. So you can see we've got the 2 in the middle, and then they've added 3 in the next layer. And they're about the same size as the middle one, but they individually added them. They didn't overlap these particular ones because they're thick. So we can see there's all of these. I don't think there's not a lot. There's one that's overlapped. This one is, these overlap. But other than that, they don't really have a lot of overlap because they're such thick petals. And again, that's a different style of flower. Again, it's probably technically a succulent. I don't know. So that's the difference, but it's very simple. And you see all they did is take that round petal and they put a divot in the middle. For all those other petals, they just put that center divot, and then you can flatten out kind of the other side where it's kind of like this, right? You can kind of see that. And that's basically what they've done, right? So again, a very simple, but again, a different style. It doesn't look like a rose, right? Like the ones we normally do. So it is different. So that's a really popular one. And that's an easy one to start and then to build around. And because you're so thick, you're not going to need as many petals. So it's a little bit faster to do. All right. So there's a bunch of cool ones that I really like that are really kind of variations of this guy, right? Now, notice how the center of this, it's again, it's not the rosebud. Basically what they have is like just a smooth mound of clay. And then they've got little petals that kind of come up around it, and then they kind of go out. So this one needs a lot more patience because it is deceiving how much clay this uses. It uses a lot of clay. And I've seen a lot of people try to do this style, and usually the only place they fall, I would say fall short of what their expectation is because they don't put enough in there. And so if this little guy, if you're good at visualizing, think about this thing with every other one of these little spikes out. It looks like a spider. You know, it looks kind of like a weed. And that's what happens a lot of times. But if you make it really nice and full, usually you'll get something that looks coolish at least, right? But this particular one, I love the way this starts because you can do so many cool things. And there's, again, I want to show you a couple of variations of this, but all starting with this center, which is different. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to, let me use some of my drier clay. No, you wouldn't normally, but just because I want to use it up, is I'm going to actually, instead of leaving it flat like this, I'm actually going to have a mound because it'll make it a little easier for me to attach the petals sometimes going out because, anyhow, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's just going to create a little mound and kind of adjust as I go. Now with kiln-fired clay especially, but most clays, you don't usually want to have a very thick piece of anything because it makes it more difficult to dry. And when things explode in the kiln, it's because all the water is not out, and then the water expands and then explodes. So, for the potters, they really have to make sure everything's really dry. And when you have obviously thicker pieces, it makes it harder. So, in general, I don't usually add anything I try not to add anything that's over, that's super, super thick. But sometimes it's just necessary and it works, and will just be careful drying it. So, like for example, if you've seen my face mugs, I'll put sometimes I love putting big hook noses and stuff, and that's a chunk of clay, right? So, it's not that you have to stay away from that or you can never, put a chunk or anything, but still, it's just kind of one of those things where it's good if you can try not to get too thick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little mound here to the center. I'll show you here in a second a little bit so you can see better what I'm doing. Not all the way to the end. Okay, so let me thin this out. Cut it again. I'll show you what I'm doing. All right. Yeah, that's probably about right. So yeah, this is what I would do just to make this style a little easier. So I would make a little mound. It's not really terribly thick, but I would slip and score it on my base. Okay, and I wouldn't go all the way to the end just because I think you'll put petals all the way to the end and it'll kind of disguise that that's here. Okay, so that's what I would do. So normally what I would do is I would take, because like I say, in the middle of here, underneath those petals, there's just a rounded piece of clay. And you could just use this. You could just use this as the rounded piece, but I want something a little higher. So I could either actually make the center part go up a little bit more. I was going to just take a little piece and slip and score it on, but I don't think so. I think I'm going to do instead. Now, again, now I play with clay a lot. So if you don't feel comfortable doing that or not sure about how that is, what I would do is just what I just did, make that little mound and then add a little, slip and score a little round nugget on there. um, yeah, I would say something kind of like this. Because basically what I'm trying to do again is this part right here. All right, so again, whether you just shape that middle part or you take a little round ball, make it smooth by rolling it in a ball, flattening the edge you want to slip and score, and then just scoring it on. That's probably the easier way of doing it. But I'm not going to do it the easy way. Actually, I always try to show you guys the easiest way. So actually, this is probably good. This is probably better to have it a little higher like this. This is maybe too high, but again, with clay, I really do want you to feel comfortable trying different things and just play with it. If it doesn't work, you can adjust it. That's the best thing about clay. So you can just slip and score a little piece on like that. And then what we're going to do for this, what I think would be the fastest thing, because you got a lot of little petals there, right? So what I would do is take, a bunch of clay, and I would make little coils, like kind of like this, where it tapers in the end. I'm going to cut this in half. So I would make a bunch of things like this. And for the center part, they're not going to need to be really big. This is probably way bigger than you need. But again, just for ease, I'm just going to start, and I think that'll be the fastest and the easiest way. I'm just going to make some coils, and they naturally, again, they don't need to be that big. Probably need to be a lot smaller. So once I roll them in my hand, we got tapered ends right there. And then I'm gonna slice it in the middle. And I've got, and I would just do a bunch of these kind of things first. And I've got, let me do a few more and then I'll show you what I would do from there for these center petals. Doesn't matter if they're all the same size or not, because you can always cut down what you don't need. But basically I would start with that kind of thing, okay? A bunch of these. And then I would take my roller and I would roll them out. So make sure you can see this. And again, I'm not, every time I roll, I'm not applying lots and lots of pressure. I'm just real easily just to flatten it. So it's not sticking to my board because I'm not doing anything that aggressive with it, okay? And you can see when I'm rolling on this particular thing, I'm leaving it thicker on the one side, and the pointed side, I'm gonna do thinner. Just like we were looking at all those other petals, how they always have the edges of the petals a lot thinner, right? So that's what I do, is I will keep those thinner at the pointed part. And then I don't put a lot of pressure. I start at the thicker part. I don't really put any pressure there. And then I just put a little pressure as I work my way down to the thinner part, so that I have, again, thinner by the point and thicker by the base. So I would just do that on all these little guys. And you can make them as, pointed as you want. Like this one, the coil wasn't super pointed. If you have something like this, after you roll it and it doesn't look as pointed as you want, remember, clay is awesome. All you got to do is literally just kind of shape it with your fingers, right? So easy, easy peasy. All right, so you got these little guys kind of all flattened out a little bit. And we'll probably cut down quite a few of them. And then what I'm going to do is figure out about the height, the size that I want, because I'm going to do a bunch of them. So again, we got that little nub in the middle that's just smooth. And then I'm going to put these little petals around. Okay. So I'm going to decide about how big I want those. So what I'm going to do is, a couple things that I'm looking at is the way I want to attach them, because I think it'll be easier. So I kind of left that where I cut the coil, I kind of left it flat, because I think it'll be easier when I slip and score it. I can just, as opposed to it being a thin piece, it'll be easier for me to attach. I can slip and score that flat base, slip and score on here, attach it in here. And then I want it so that there's enough room for it to curl. This is actually a little bit too tall. So I'm going to, for me, again, you may try it and go, oh, that looks really cool. So I'm just, and I'm also not trying to mimic a specific flower, so I don't really care. I'm just going, oh, I like this, or I don't like this. So, but basically, so you're going to want the edge, the bottom thicker, and then this part you're going to want long enough where basically it's going to almost meet, it's going to pretty much cover this nub up, right? If we do a whole bunch of petals like this, you're going to, and we put them in there, it's going to cover that, and it's just going to show, this is only going to just peek through. And you could do them like, I've seen several flowers where they're literally just like this and they're flat, and that looks awesome. Now these guys on this particular blue one, and I was trying to find a picture. I'm pretty sure Sherry did a flower one time and she was showing us, it was really cool, but I'm pretty sure she used the handle of her brush to kind of give these little skinny petals like that a rounded shape. So if we had them a little wider, if we had them wide enough, we could take our little brush and kind of bend them around a little bit, because that creates, see how that is? That gives us so much dimension for the little petals, and it really looks cool. And it's still thick enough that you could slip and score. I just love that. I think that looks really cool. So what I would do is I would slip and score something like this on. I would give it a little dimension, and then I would curl it in. All right. So I'm going to actually do that. Give me a minute and I'll, and so once I also have the height like this, I'm going to make the others for the center part, since they're all going to be the same, I'm going to cut down the others so that they're all the same. And that way I don't have to keep doing that with each single one. So I'm just lining them up. I'm using that first one that I tested, and I'm going to make them all that size really quickly. All right. And okay, so I've got, right now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know if I'll need that many, but that's fine. And they're again all about the same height. I'm going to take my little paint, sorry, the words escape me. You know, that thing with the thing, the paintbrush handle, and I'm going to wrap, just really gently wrap these petals around the paintbrush handle, pull the paintbrush handle out, and then all of a sudden, voila, right? We got a dimensional little cool petal. So I'm going to do that on the others, just kind of press it in there. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to double check again. Do I want the height? See, there's still, some of them are still high. So I'm just going to cut off the base some more. Make them even shorter. Yay, easy. Okay. All right. They're all about the same size-ish. Kind of got this little cool dimension thing going on. And then I'm going to slip and score. And so for me, what I think the easiest thing to do would be just go ahead and actually for this whole thing, I would just go ahead, because we're going to put petals, or you can, if I don't do it myself all the way to the end. I'm going to put petals and cover this whole thing. So the easiest thing to do would be just to slip and score this whole base, right? I mean, worst case scenario, if any of it showed at the edge, you could just take a wet paintbrush and smooth it all out. But I don't think it's going to show, because you don't want it to show. You want these, especially on this style, you want these things packed in there. See, I mean, they don't leave any room. They want them packed because there's so much space up by the pointed ends that, again, if these things aren't packed in there tightly at the base, they're going to look kind of sparse and scraggly and stuff. So I would suggest just packing them in as many as you can. It's probably the easiest way to do it. So, and again, I'm going to score all the base. I'm going to leave this smooth. Now, you don't have to. Actually, you know, I'm just leaving it smooth because this one's smooth in the middle. But you don't have to. Like, if you wanted it to look kind of like this, like I was showing you before with the last one with the paintbrush, you could use your score tool and rough this little nub all up if you wanted to do a different style flower, and it would give you that, again, organic look in the center. So it's up to you. But for this, I'll just go ahead and leave this little point smooth. So I'm gonna slip and score these little guys on, and just get a couple on, and I'll show you real quick what the plan is anyhow. Okay. These things are so amazing looking in a group. If you haven't, if you're not on the Facebook, the private Facebook group, Happy Life Pottery Loves Pottery Projects, our closed group, and I only let people that have done the projects in. I get a lot of requests, but I'm like, nope. There's a picture Sherry has of, she did a lot of flowers back when the pandemic first happened and we were doing Zoom, and she stained a board and put all her flowers on it, and then put this display above a door, and it's gorgeous. I mean, like, it's really cool. I'm gonna have to do it someday. So if you haven't seen that, you should go see it. It's really cool. Anyhow, so the flowers are fun, especially when you do different styles. She did all different styles. So I'm starting with this. Now, of course, you could leave it like this, but that's not the style I'm going for. I'm starting, and I slipped and scored these all in the base, and now I'm going to bend them in. Right? Hold on. I'll do it down, then I'll show you. It's a little easier than me trying to do it up there at the camera. Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of what I got going on here. So this is what I end up with, something like that. That makes sense? And you can decide again how, like, again, this was the original one that I'm kind of patterning it after. You could have it right up against this little center nub. I like the, that one's a little high, sorry, but it's clay, so I can fix it. I like the space myself around because to me it gives it a little bit more dimension, but you could easily, you could easily, you know, have it right flat up against that little round nub underneath there, and it would look totally good. And again, if you know, there's other things you could try some variations. You don't have to do it like this. You could, if you wanted to, um, do your centerpiece where you take that round ball of clay, and then well, try that again, round ball of clay, and then flatten it. And when you go to slip and score it on, you could actually, instead of, you know, doing all the petals, just for the centerpiece at least, if you wanted to kind of just take a little shortcut, you could kind of press and do like, you know, something like that. And I've seen some like that and they look really good too. So let me just show you again. You could easily just again do a little shortcut like that instead of doing all the little petals around it. And that's an idea. That would work, especially for that centerpiece, because you're going to have a lot of petals up against it. And again, you're going to decide how close you want the these petals to be touching, right? You can go right up against it, or you can kind of leave some space. I left a little tiny bit of space just to give it a little more dimension. So that's what I would do for that first kind of group of petals. And then as you start adding the little petals on the way out, basically what you want to do is start having them. So you got the first group like this, right? The first ring. And then the next one you're going to have kind of out a little bit. And then the next one, instead of kind of like this, you might start to have go like this, right? So, and they kind of have it mixed in where you've got on like that third row, it's like some are like this, some are kind of like this, you know, and so and clay is perfect for that because you really can, again, just do so many different things. So real quick, I'm going to come up with some, we'll do another row so you can see. All right, and then I'll be deciding how big I want them to be. So I'm going to test and then I'll figure out the height and then I'll kind of make the rest kind of about that height. And especially as we build out and we want to attach, I think it's going to be easiest when I have these, again, my little petals, is to tap the bottom and make it flat so that I think it'll be easier to attach. Because again, that's the whole thing about the flowers, whether it's kiln fired or air dry, you want to make sure they're attached down there really well, right? And I think if you have that flat base, they're much easier to attach. All right, so then like I said, this next round, I would slip and score and I would kind of play with it as far as the positioning. I like to alternate the petals instead of putting them right behind each other like that. I like to kind of have them in between, but again, that's up to you. You play with it and see how you like it. So I'm going to slip and score those on and then I'll kind of position it. And I usually kind of put them on and then I'll kind of play with it just to kind of, and again, clay is so great because you don't have to decide until you get it on there. And then just kind of see what seems to work the best. So, and again, give it lots of nice movement and everything. And they have it on theirs about the same height. It might be slightly higher when they start going out, but the second round, it looks pretty close to the same height as the first, maybe just slightly higher. So once I've kind of slipped and scored those guys on, now I'm going to really make sure, just like on my regular flowers, I'm going to press the base in because I really want to make sure those are attached, okay, so they don't fall off. So I've got my second layer started on one side, and so this is where I would kind of play with it and kind of see, you know, like I could have them. I don't press them right up against each other because you want, again, you give it some space, you'll get some dimension. But what you may want to do is play with what you think looks best, as far as you may have some going out, some going in. Um, they start to do that on their flower, and I do that a lot on mine, where I'll kind of, and if anything starts cracking, you know, just use some water and smooth it out. But you could, you know, kind of start having them do different things if you, instead of having it uniformly, right? Because that's the whole thing. The main thing is that you have them really close together. You've got a lot of them. You're pushing in that base and making sure it's really, really well attached. You can see. And then that's basically, again, how you are getting your center of your flower. And you can see, again, I've added these petals. I haven't gone all the way around, but you get the idea so far. We got our center like this, and then we've got our additional petals. And again, you can have them, you might want to play with it like I was. I don't know. It's like, well, do I want them all kind of a little more uniformly going in, or do I want them starting to go out? You can kind of play with that and see, because it does give a different look. I mean, having them all uniform looks great too. You can see they're all bending in. At this point, you probably want to start having them, after you go through your second round of petals, you'll probably want the second batch, your third ring of petals to start going out, just so it starts to give, because again, you start, that center part's different, and then the others, usually, again, the second ring is kind of in like this still too, a little bit. And then the third ring is usually where they start, either are going like this, or they're starting to go both ways, where you have some like this, some like that. That, I would say, the third ring for sure. And then this one, let's see, I know it's got a lot of petals. So 1, 2, this one has like about 4-ish rings of these little petals. And these center ones, again, these are about the same size, but then they start to go up just slightly, where they're not a lot higher, but they're wider. They're a little bit bigger. Yeah. So you can kind of play with that on your third, I would say your third, and that'll start to, and then have them again start to go like this, because then when you get out to, you can go as far as you want. But what they've done on this one is they have, like I say, about 5 rows. It's not even all the way around, so it's about 4 or 5 rows of these little petals, and then they start adding the fun spiky things. So I want to, like I say, I want to make sure that I go over that too. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. And again, the main thing on these is you make sure that the spiky things are really, really, really close together. When you get to a point where, again, about, I would say, and it depends also on how big your flower is, but I would say maybe about 4, possibly a couple others that make almost a 5th row, but really like 4 solid rows of these little petals. And again, let me show you something real quick on this so you can see what I'm talking about. So you've got these little ones, and they're not super uniform right next to each other. They start to overlap, so it keeps it organic looking. They have some starting to pull out, you know, and you can do either way, it doesn't matter. But they have movement. So some are going in, some are going out. But then when they get to these outer edge, and it's about, again, 4 rows and then almost 5 on some, they get wider. So you see the difference there. We've been using our handle of our brush to make these divots in the middle. Well, when you get to these outer ones, they have them flatter and kind of going out and a little bit wider. You don't have to. You could do it the same way. They would look fabulous either way, but I'm just showing you this particular one, how they do it, okay? So when you get to the point where, again, you've got a good solid base of these little tiny guys, and you want to get to the spiky things, again, I'll show you the way these guys kind of do theirs. And then there was something I saw that looked very cool and I wanted to try. And I haven't tried it yet. So I was like, ooh, we got to try that. All right, so I'm going to smush it out. Yeah, that's much better. All right. and again, I'm not looking for anything really thick. And then I'm going to use my roller to kind of smooth it. I'm not worried about muscling it down. I'm just smoothing it, rotating it, smoothing it, rotating it. So I've got my little piece here. And then what I would do is I'll just take, you don't generally need something super big. I could probably use the smallest one, but I'm going to go up one just to try, just in case. Because you're going to be doing the same thing that we did with the other petals and kind of thinning it, which makes it more like an oval and makes it automatically a little bit bigger. So, yeah. So let me do a couple because I wanted to show you. So I'm smushing this out to the thickness again. Okay. All right, so we've got two of these guys. And again, just a basic round. And then I would do like we did the other where we made the one side thin, okay, and left the other side a little thicker. These don't need to be thick at all. But again, we're going to kind of make it oval and thin on the one side. All right. And basically, what they've done here, you can kind of see it. Let me show you up close again. Is they've basically twisted. And then they have a thicker base and it comes to a point. So you could do any variation of that and it would look good. So you could just take your little twist here. And if it was me, I would just create a cone where it's really pointed on the one side and then roll it where this is thicker on the other side. Oops. So you're kind of looking for something about like this. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect because you can shape it and do it. Once you kind of have it in your point, the point is to have some variation and stuff. And it doesn't have to be symmetrical or perfect. It's just to have like your little point and then have some interest. And because I would do it a little thinner. And again, I'm trying to purposely not, I'm kind of smushing it, but I'm purposely not trying to keep it like smooth and even and perfect. I want to have that seam showing, but basically like a long pencil tip or something, right? So, and then what they've done on theirs is they actually, so it's the same thing where you cut down the size to whatever you think, and you have your nice flat base. So you figure out about what size you're going to do, and you're going to have your nice flat base, and you can make it flat if it's not flat enough, and you can slip and score it on. Again, make sure you're using more slip than I'm really showing you right now because I'm kind of shortcutting it a little bit. But you're going to want to make sure it's on. And this is where that little dome thing kind of helps because you're going to want to build out and attach these things. And this is, again, I'm kind of shorting it also. It should be probably at least two more rounds of little petals before you start sticking these guys on. But when you do, just make sure it's on really good. And then once you've got your kind of your point here, you could also play with it. And they've got a lot of movement in there. So I would take mine, I would twist it even more, right? So you can kind of see. And that way you kind of got those twists in it. And that's kind of what they've done. And then you just want to make sure this part is pointed and this part is thicker. And what I would do is just play with it until you get it to about what you think. But you're basically wanting the base to be thicker and this part to be thinner. But if you have it uniform, like if you have it all skinny, it's going to look probably not exactly what you're wanting. So you do want, just like we talked about with the other petals, you're going to want a thicker base where that's nice and full, and then it goes off into the, and they do also on theirs, they make it even more of a point, and then they do like a little bit of movement. They'll have like a little, and again, that's just like we do on our petals. You're gonna, just like I did on my petal, you're going to just play with that and kind of see. It helps to see, like when you're doing just one, you can't really tell, right? So I would go ahead and put them all in place and then see, okay, do I want to move it or whatever? Because I want to show you these guys. They are all going all, they're not straight up and down. They're all moving. They're all kind of got a little bit of movement to them. And the other thing is, and I want to show you this because it's probably going to be a little easier. So that was one of the ways you could do it. But what I think is going to be easier for this style is to do what we did with these little petals. And so I was watching this. I was like, oh, I got to try this. It's really cool. Where you basically have a coil roll, but a thick one, like that, like we did for the smaller petals. Like that kind of. And then you're going to have it rolled it out just like we did with the, again, the other petals, where it's still thick at the base and then thin at the point. And then they've got, you could do the same thing where you use your brush and kind of create that divot in the middle, right? And then at this point, what you can do is start, once you've got that divot, just like the little ones, you could start to put that together and keep, again, you're going to want to keep this really nice and thick so you can attach it, but you could kind of twist it like that. And then you'll start to see, you can see I didn't roll this out really well. I left all the craggy stuff in there, but you can kind of see what it does. And that makes a really cool pointed thing. It's basically, again, the same procedure we did with the little petals, but you've done it with thicker and bigger clay. You rolled out the big coil, rolled it out where you've got skinny at the top, used your brush to create the divot. And then once you've got that, you kind of twist it and keep this pointed at the end and kind of make this little twist thing going on. And that's kind of what they've got going on there too. And that's a really cool way to make it. And then you decide you're going to figure out how big you want that. You're going to slice off what doesn't work, tap it on your board. So basically you'll have that thick base. And again, you're going to decide how big that is, but that's kind of the idea that you're going for. And you want it wider at the base. All right. But the thing that I saw that I thought was really cool is they had basically done a flower where they had a bunch of these, just like we just did just now, of varying heights and styles. And then they rolled it out, again, thinner at the tip. And then they kind of overlapped them. They kind of took them and overlapped. And now they had a special tool for this part, but I think it can be done without it. So basically they overlapped them. I think sometimes they do like 2 like this, and sometimes they do kind of 3 where you can see they're different heights and different things. And then they had this fancy little pottery tool that they pressed on it, but I'm just going to use my fingers at the base just to make sure that they're nice and together. But they took this, and then I would cut off all the extra I don't need. And then they did something like this for each of the points that they pressed on. And it was actually very cool. They started with smaller ones towards the center, and then they added, every time they would add one of these, either double or triple. But it ended up being very, very cool. So I thought that was neat. I would like to, maybe one of these days I'll do a full one like that. All right, let's see. All right, so here's one, and you can see it's a really cool, I think she had done a really neat grouping of different styles of flowers, and you can kind of see that what she did here, it's not anything so complex, but it's a really cool, different style. And she glazed it bright yellow, like a little, you know, daffodil or something. And it was really cute. So she just made those little tiny coils in the center and stuck them in there and slipped and scored. And you can see where she made the indentations with the brush handle, right? Where it was basically just this big round, kind of somewhat ruffly disc, made the indentations. So again, pretty simple. And then underneath the big petals with that kind of slightly curved at the base and then were flatter at the edge. But I thought it was really cute. Here it is. Okay. So this one again, you can see how that center, remember how I was showing you that round ball that you could take the handle of your brush, and I had done it with just sticking the brush in there and making divots, where she looks like she just made little lines and stuff, and that was cute. And then she did some, now I will tell you, this is like David's nightmare. um, because these are little tiny, delicate with kiln-fired clay, little things that can break so easily. However, they didn't, or if they did, we fixed them. Anyhow, they looked really good when they were glazed. But you can see she just did a really simple little pestles, I think that's what they're called, and attached that underneath the ball. And you can see she did 2 layers that she basically kind of layered on top of each other, bigger ones underneath. They almost look like puzzle pieces, but she's kind of got a little, there's a lot of variation, but at the same time, she's kind of got they're almost like square pieces that she's cut like a centerpiece. I don't know if she used a cookie cutter. It doesn't look like it, but you can see it's such a neat idea because totally different kind of flower than what we've shown today or even in the class, but it was really, really cool. So there you go. Okay. So this one, that beautiful. So it's basically obviously like the original style that we did, but it almost, I mean, it was really, she's got very dense, and she did, smaller in the middle, and she went bigger and bigger and bigger. And she fit a lot of petals on there. And she really got roughly, she did that just by creating that with her fingers. And it really created a really beautiful effect, I thought. By densely putting in the petals like that and then creating all that movement. And she made the edges look like they're kind of thinner. So anyhow, that was also a really cool one. But I love that little ladybug they put on there, and just something cute like that even, just makes a big difference. It's really, just thought it was a really, really cute idea. This, I know for sure this was one of Sherry's. Now Sherry's not on anymore, but again, if you end up going to the Facebook group, you'll see the display she did overall. And she got really detailed. Again, a little bit of David's nightmare, but they made it through, and you can see the tiny little petals she did. And she created those lines in the center. You can do that with a pen or your pen tool or anything like that. And you can see it's very dense in the middle. She did that center ball of clay, like I was showing you, using her brush to push in and create all those divots. And then she just densely put in these other little petals all the way around and had it gradually get bigger and bigger. And then she obviously densely, again, this was very dense, that she packed them in so she didn't have them too thick. That's the whole difference, is when you do a thick petal, you don't have as many petals, right? Like that succulent. So if you do thinner like this, you pack them in and you get a quite dense flower. So you can see that was also extremely cool. Okay. So this is, I think this was Sherry's also, that red flower up there. And this is what I was starting to show you before originally, because you can take those round cookie cutter shapes like we did, flatten out the edge. You can cut them with a pin tool and make them all roughly. You can have them, you don't have to have like little small ones in the middle. You could basically do that center little bebop thing. She put a bunch of little, I think they're called pestles, but I'm not 100% sure, those little tiny round things. And then she went straight, instead of these small petals, she went straight up to these big, and I think that's a poppy, but it's really beautiful, isn't it? I mean, I think overall there's just two big petals here that are not even really overlapped. And then we've got like 1, 2, 3, like 4 petals on the outside that are really large, right? And she created those lines with her brush handle. I remember they're not really sharp lines. She just kind of drew them from the outer edge to the center. She has the edges really thin, like we were talking about. So you can see that. That's a really gorgeous variation of a flower. Not complicated or anything like that, but gorgeous. And then you can see this one underneath, the purple one. A lot of the same idea, but a totally different look. So this has that center ball of clay that she put the used her brush handle to press in those divots there. And then she put like, I'm not sure what she did there actually. It looks like, again, kind of like up here, but maybe littler. And then she didn't do this flower. This might be a different person's flower too, but this flower obviously has smaller petals going around the big ball of clay, but it's not, again, still not like the rose, like some of these others. It's only got 5 petals. So you can see, and I know that the clay is very, very thin on the ends like we talked about, because the glaze is white there and dark where it's thick. So did the exact same thing that we kind of talked about earlier, made it thick in the base, thin at the top, and cut it with the pin tool and just shaped it and made it kind of, gave it some movement, and then drew some texture on there on the edges. And I mean, it made such a big difference. Again, nothing like crazy complicated, but definitely gave it a whole different look, right? And then you have this one down here, the blue one, which is like exactly like the yellow one we talked about, where you've got the thinner edges, the fluted edge, where it spirals, and then the base. They did a really, really nice job on that. That looks beautiful. I think that looks beautiful. So you can see when we start looking at the flowers right here, so this one up in the top corner is the purple, just plain round one. It's like we learned to do it initially with the uniform thickness. And then the green one in the middle is kind of like someone that has a little more petals, a little more thin, and that they've shaped the outer edges of the petals so it looks a little different, which is different than this one in the corner that's, again, just purely round petals. They all look fantastic, all of them. I mean, it's so neat. They're just, so it's just variations, right?